Hello, hello, hello. This is Jay Frost speaking to you from, of course, the Philanthropy Mastermind series. Really happy that you can be here today, especially since this is our last live session of 2024. We've got a lot coming up next year that I'm going to tell you about at the very, very end of today's presentation. So do stay tuned, stick around for all of that. We'd love to have your input, but we also want to share a lot with you. Now, I really do appreciate the fact that you're here picking up those CFRE credits today, but also here for a session that I know is going to be very important to all of us in the sector. And that is, of course, on strengthening your impact story for private funders with Emily Taylor. I'm going to be introducing her to you in just a moment. But before I do, of course, I want to welcome you here, encourage you to participate in this process, which you can today through either using the Q&A or the chat throughout. Both Emily and I and our producer Jack will be monitoring that during the presentation today. So use those as your spaces to ask questions, make comments. We really do appreciate it. In fact, you can do what Rosa has already done. Thank you, Rosa. And that's just to say hello and maybe let us know which part of the country or the world you're from, which organization that you're with. And in fact, we already have the first international contribution there. Thank you very much, Michelle. Good to see you there from Germany. That's a wonderful place in Berlin. Shonda, hello, and Elizabeth, great to see you all. It's good to see you, Brenna and Drew. Please join your friends there, Beth and Shonda and others, just saying hello and let us know that you're in the space with us today. We really do appreciate that. And most importantly, I know our guest presenter does as well. It will help her to contextualize some of what she's about to share with you. I also want to take just a moment to thank, in the deepest and biggest possible way, our sponsors of not only today's session, not only this year, but going back 9 years now, and that's DonorSearch. DonorSearch has provided a platform so that we can have conversations with people like Emily Taylor today, and with you. And they've been doing that now for a total of nearly 620 different sessions. So that's all thanks to their generosity and letting us have carte blanche in just having these non-commercial sessions. So I really do want to thank them, especially as we get into the giving season and the thanking season, and express my gratitude to them. If you ever have an occasion to see these folks out there in the wild, whether it's at a conference or elsewhere, and you want to just say hello, give them a bit of thanks for letting us talk with so many great philanthropic leaders, 400 now, like Emily Taylor today, who have been sharing with you. You can thank them, but you can also thank DonorSearch for that opportunity. Now, I do want to introduce Emily to you, and I want to encourage you once again to use the Q&A and the chat throughout, so please keep those spaces warm. Emily is a qualitative research expert with over 20 years of experience helping nonprofit leaders showcase their impact to secure critical funding. You may know her as the principal of her firm, Teeny Big, which is one of my favorite firm names out there. Emily uses her unique listening methodology, something very important to all of us in fundraising, to uncover meaningful patterns and firsthand stories from communities served, helping organizations articulate clear, compelling impact narratives. Her work has supported organizations like the American Academy of Pediatrics, Feeding America, Action Housing, et cetera, et cetera. She's based in Chicago and serves on local boards, leveraging her passion for community building and strategic thinking to help nonprofits drive growth and change lives, which is what impact stories are fundamentally all about. I'm so grateful. Thank you, Emily, for being here to share today.
Thank you for that great introduction, Jay. And yeah, cool to see some Chicago folks out there in the chat. Well, with that, I think we'll get going on what I have to share with you today, which is really how you can strengthen your impact story with funders. And let's see, sorry. The reason I want to really talk to you about this today is there's different ways you can share your impact story. But when we talk about private funders, who I'm talking about are major gifts, foundations, people who know about fundraising, give often, and they need a slightly different story. And that's really where impact comes into play. And so I wanted to really talk about how, as we think to this coming year, this coming 4 years, there's definitely talk of less potential grant funding out there. And so the more you can strengthen your impact story, the better set you are going to be for the coming years to increase your funding around private funders, and really keep that sustainability for whatever might happen. So that biggest thing is that, there's different expectations with private funders. And so I wanted to kind of talk to you a little bit about who I've designed this presentation for. Um, you might be on a trajectory of growth, or like I said, in these coming years, you really want to make sure you continue your growth, but are unsure about government, federal funding. So there's some reasons people struggle in this space, and it's especially certain organizations. Um, Perhaps you have long-term outcomes that take years, decades to achieve, and they're part of your mission, but it's really hard to share that impact. If that's the case, we're going to talk today about how you can overcome that. It's also difficult for organizations that are maybe outside the box, are unique, or your impact is still trying to find clarity because you're addressing an old problem in a new way. That's something we're going to talk about today too. And then you also might have a challenge if your impact is nuanced. Maybe you're a behavior change organization or around advocacy, and it's really hard to measure your impact. Um, if any of these situations affect you, you are in the right place. Because struggle facing growing nonprofits is that funders like this that I'm talking about want proof your model's making an impact, but you improve human lives. And that's really difficult to measure. And oftentimes, our mission is not created based on measuring impact. And so there's this gap there that we really have to address because funders want to know what change you're making on the ground. Um, but that change is difficult because you're solving problems that no one's solved yet. So I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Emily. As Jay mentioned, I've had a variety of clients. I work for a variety of size of clients, but I really help them listen to their audience and use that to help them tell their story. So I'm a natural listener and strategizer with a big curiosity about how people think. I also have a background in for-profit work, and I used to do a lot of consumer research in that space. And the reason I want to tell you that is companies are listening to people. I've spent so many years helping companies sell deodorant and pizza and bug spray and dog toys, and they're listening for how people are thinking and feeling about their products as well as what they're experiencing. And I really want to bring that to the nonprofit space because I think there's such an opportunity to learn from your community, from your constituents, and help tell your story through that work because that's really why we're here. And if companies are doing it, I don't want them to draw attention away from the great work that nonprofits are doing because nonprofits are what really matter in this world, being able to make that change. So I brought that skill over to the nonprofit space because I knew there had to be a better way for nonprofits to understand their community and build buy-in with them. So I started to help them listen from, listening to formerly incarcerated people, nurses, people receiving food, executives of national nonprofits, and really crossing a huge range of perspectives because I think that objectivity is what allows me to really hear what different communities are saying and how we can then strategically use that to drive funding. So I wanted to share an example of an organization that I worked with locally in Chicago, My Block, My Hood, My City. And they're really, outside the box nonprofit. They have a mission to inspire youth, empower communities, and build a better world one block at a time. They're very focused on specific, very hyper local communities, Black clubs, and really helping them thrive and supporting them in a lot of different ways. So the situation was that after 2020, they received an influx of donations and they started to grow as an organization. But they were just doing what worked for their community. And as their fundraising grew, so did the expectations of the change they needed to show about their work, that impact. Funders wanted to know what impact they were making on the ground. But that was really tricky to answer because how do you measure inspiration and empowerment, things that were in their mission? They had testimonials, but those really only represented the people that were most engaged. In their mission was building a better world, but even doing that one block at a time involves a lot of elements that were outside of their control. Crime in the communities, job opportunities, infrastructure that that was really sort of beyond the scope of one small organization. Another challenge is that their mission, some of the words they use could mean some different things to different people, especially funders who are outside of that work. But despite this difficulty, their work was so important and they knew they were making an impact because that's what their constituents told them. So this is really the challenge I see in a lot of organizations is that they needed to start asking themselves, how do their constituents see the change you're making? How big is that change you're making? How widespread is that change you're making? How many people is it affecting? And how big is that change? And then how might you increase that change? What's that potential for the impact you're making? And really, this organization, a lot of organizations, they need to listen because those answers are out there in your community. So, like this organization, My Block, My Hood, My City, if you see your organization making an impact and you know you have a great impact story, you just need to learn how to tell it. You need to focus on your constituents, the people you serve. And that's where I started with this organization. So I started by listening to their constituents, what change they saw the organization making in their lives, in their communities, and we created constituent-centered impact language. So, these are things like, what have been the benefits of working with this organization? How would you define commonly used words? So, for instance, community, empowerment, what do they actually mean by this? And how can we turn that into impact language? And we can also take some of these things and correlate them. So by creating that constituent-centered impact language, we are then able to go out and measure it and bring data to that impact. This gave them the opportunity to show the impact they were making and tell the story of how it supports their mission. So I wanted to just get you in the perspective of some of the questions private funders want to know about impact. And for those of you that have had conversations with private funders, major donors, foundations, I'd love to see in the chat maybe some of the questions you've heard from them. I'm gonna open up the chat here on my screen. So one is, what's the impact your organization is making on the lives of people you serve? It's a pretty, obvious question, but it's one of those things that's it's really hard to answer. So we've kind of pulled apart a bit here. But they not only want to know the impact, they want to know how you're measuring this impact. How do you know that you're making that impact and not just telling a testimonial? They want to know how prevalent or repeatable is this impact? There's always questions, how do you know you're not just affecting a small handful of people, that this is something that can really make a big change in the world? And they also want to know how they can help. How can our funding help increase this impact in the future? So these are really the things going on in funders' minds when they talk to you. They certainly need to know more of the story, but when they think about impact and setting your organization apart, they want to answer these questions. And so it's really about outputs versus impacts or outcomes. So if you have a logic model, if you don't have a logic model, it's really not just how many people attended programs, how many people have you served, the percentage of people who might need your services in a given area, testimonials. Those are all important, but those are not going to show your impact. The impact is really around the percentage of people changed by your programs, the percentage of people highly rating your services in a way that fits your mission, the percentage of people who want your services. Are they seeing the value that you're bringing to them? And then the numbers behind those stories. So testimonials and stories are great to tell, but when you can share some data behind them, that really fleshes it out and helps answer these questions that are on funders' minds. So if you're getting a little sweaty by me talking about impact a lot, I just wanted to recognize some tensions that make this difficult. So finding impact can be a challenge for organizations because your impact might take a really long time to show up. Oh, sorry, I just saw someone going back to the last screen, this one. And you guys will get all the slides at the end. So I will not hold back on you. So if your impacts take a long time to show up, this can be a struggle because you need funding now in order to get there. And so this can definitely be hard to prove that you're making an impact or as big of an impact as you think you're making, or you're making, that you want to be able to show them how you're getting there in order to get those funds today for the future. But there's definitely a gap in expectations there. So another area that might be a challenge is if you focus on behavior change or something that is more advocacy based, because funders want to know specifically what impact your work has, but there might be a lot of influences on the people that you're working with. For instance, if you're trying to get people to be more sustainable, your organization can do a lot and make a big impact, but there's still all sorts of factors of misinformation and other things going on in the world that might affect the impact that you would like to make. And so how do you measure just what you are doing? And another tension is that your organization might be trying something new, whether it's a specific program or your whole mission is taking on a new idea to solve an old problem. You're not going to have those reliable outcomes because they haven't been proven yet. You're still working towards them. You might be experimenting, and that's something where you need that funding in order to get there. So those are some areas that you might struggle with, and I want to talk to you a little bit about how we can work around some of those tensions. So the thing to remember is, I've said this is impact storytelling. Stories, we know, are remembered 22 times more than facts alone. I think this has been shared a lot of like humans are storytelling animals. And so we do need to have things pulled together in stories to really remember them. But we need to remember, especially for this funder audience, foundations, major gifts, they don't just need words, they need to also paint a picture and tell that data story to your audience. So I wanted to share 5 elements for telling strong impact stories. So the first is the context. This is especially true if you are reaching out to a new funder who doesn't know your sector, might not understand your mission, and is meeting your organization for the first time, or and still understanding your organization. You need to include the history of your organization. Why are you set up for success to solve this problem? You also need to talk about the challenge. Don't assume that the funder knows, what you're trying to do in the world. People can think that, bringing sandwiches to the homeless is the best way to help people in that situation. But if you really understand better ways to improve people's lives, then you need to share the challenge and the nuances that you know about it. And the other important element here is why now? Why are you seeking this funding now, what kind of creates some sense of urgency around it. The second area is your approach. What makes you uniquely set up to help solve this problem, to help tackle your mission? And that can be your values. What do you bring to the table as an organization? Even if other organizations might be similar to you, what's your unique approach for it? What's your vision? What are you trying to really, that future that you would like to create? What does that look like? How does that unique to your organization? And then a program overview. What activities is your organization doing in order to tackle this challenge? The third area is action. So being able to show what you're doing on the ground. What results are you getting? Those people coming to your programs, those outputs, any video or photos that are able to take people there and really show what your organization is doing on the ground. Now, these first three are things you probably already have. And so now we get into some of the more challenging elements to put into your impact story. And this is the impact. What we're really going for here is measured change. What can you show people would not be able to do without the work that you bring to the table? So this can be stories that the people you serve tell, testimonials for how things are changing their lives. It can also be feedback, potentially in surveys, and being able to incorporate that, as well as successes. What big accomplishments have been made to show your impact. This could be, awards that have been won, but it could also just be achieving certain goals that your organization has set out to strive for. And lastly, you do not want to miss this opportunity. You want to share what is that opportunity for donors to donate and what's going to happen as a result of that funding. So what's your plan for funding? What's that anticipated change that additional funding will make? Not just what you've done in the past, but what specifically will change based on their future donation. And then that call to action. What is it that you need from them in order to make that change, that anticipated change, and continue on your plan? So these are the 5 elements that really help you tell that substantive story. And they're definitely elements that can be used for other aspects of fundraising, but to really get a foundation, a large donor, you want to be able to tell this more complete story. And so I want you to think about any areas in those 5 that might have gaps for your organization. You can put them in the chat if there's something specific that you feel like you don't quite have yet. Because the thing that I see the most with organizations is this number 4, this impact. A lot of these other things are what, 1 through 3 is really what you do as a nonprofit. And so to be able to gather that information is super important in order to, to just do your work. And that number 5, that opportunity is very important so that donors know how they can, participate in your work. So this number 4 is something that you might not have. This, how do you measure impact and share that impact? I can see, client privacy issues. Yeah, I think that's a really good question, is like, how do you share things? And, I think getting permission, being very clear about with who you're collecting information for, what it will be used for. Definitely protecting identities where possible. And we can, I don't think I'm specifically addressing that in this presentation, but we can bring that up at the end as well to talk more about it. So I wanted to show you a case study that was really focused around gathering impact for a tricky mission. So you can kind of see how this works. So I did an impact study for an organization called the JAR in Boston, and they're a really unique arts organization because they were not just about presenting art, they really wanted to increase human connection and reduce polarity. So they created these very unique performances where they would gather diverse audiences and facilitate conversations in order for people to have deep, meaningful conversations with people not like them. But what was their impact? They really struggled with telling that impact story, and they spent many years calling themselves an experiment because there wasn't an organization out there like them that they knew of, and they weren't really trying to follow anyone else, but they really weren't sure what that change was. They had great testimonial videos from people who went through their programs and really had a lot of the changes that they wanted to see in the world, but it really wasn't enough to prove their model was working beyond those few individuals. They also had theories about the change they were making. They just didn't have the evidence. So what I did was really help them by listening to the people that went through their programs, develop constituent-centered impact language. This was, when people went through their programs, why did they come back? What did they feel differently about? How did they view the world differently? And we're able to use that information to then measure this impact with a wider, with all of all their constituents, really. So being able to phrase things in a way that people experience, and then go out and ask, did your experiences with the jar contribute to this change? Change A, change B, change C. And we're able to actually measure that. Then they were able to share these stats alongside stories. So the data supported the stories that they had with funders for a really powerful case of impact. So this is just sort of showing some of that data. I mean, because we were able to phrase it in a way that resonated with the people attending the programs, we got really great response rates. So 85 to 90% of people were rating the impact on what we were asking them very highly. And then we're able to pair that with quotes and stories that told people's personal experience. They then were able to take that information along with the 1 through 5 elements, the storytelling elements that I was telling you about, and turn it into something that was shareable with donors. So they were able to make a presentation. I recorded a video. And I say this because the way you tell your story doesn't need to be in one format. I often look to see who an organization is trying to reach. Does it need to be 30 seconds? Does it need to be an hour? How can you present all that information? 30 seconds might be a lot to go through all 5 of those things, but sometimes that's all you get. And so being able to take those 5 elements and put them into various storytelling methods in order to really connect with the funder that you're talking to. So the change that we're really able to make with this organization is they started where they couldn't clearly articulate their impact. They were basing a lot of what they thought would happen off of theoretical ideas, things that they were discussing in their meetings, things that the board thought change they were making. And that just made them shift depending on the funder they were talking to. They didn't quite fit clearly into one type of foundation or sector. And so they were telling their story slightly differently depending on the funder they were talking to. Once they had this work, they were able to share their impacts based on real changes seen by participants. They're backed by stories participants told an objective viewer, and they're able to stay true to their mission no matter what funder they were talking to because they knew exactly what impact they were making. There was also sort of some unintended benefits to this work too. We knew that this impact work would really help them with grant writing, with funder conversations, and being able to show they weren't just an experiment, they were actually making these changes that were the result of the study. But the unintended benefits were also that constituents, as they held their programming and shared some of the data that was found in this work, the people that were at their programs really resonated with it because it was in their own language, because they were having those same experiences. And additionally, staff not only got to see the change that they were making represented in stories and data, but they were also now better prepared to do their own fundraising conversations and be able to share exactly the impact that was being made with everyone that they interacted with. So I wanted to just break down, let me just grab a sip of water, how I approach impact storytelling and the steps to it, because it is hard to really gather this information or maybe see what it could be when you're in your current situation. But there's really three main steps. The first one is to articulate your impact hypothesis. And this is how I help clients get ready for this process. We start by seeing what impact your staff sees is happening, because you are listening to it's the people you serve already, depending on where your staff is in that interaction. So you have some ideas of what's going on. You've had conversations with people. So what's happening, and how does that tie back to your mission? Because you can certainly benefit people without it connecting back to your mission. And so we want to make sure that we're staying focused on what ties back to the mission and vision that you state. We then clarify what keeps you from measuring some of these impacts. And this might be where that tie into some of the patient confidentiality can come into. We talk about what other factors might also influence your impact, such as the environment, politics, news. What else needs to be taken into account so that we can see how your impact is living in this bigger world that we live in, and what might be intertwined and make things difficult for you. We then also to think about what expectations funders may have for your impact to determine if there's gaps. So funders that you've spoken to in the past may have an idea of what they think you're supposed to be doing and come in with that expectation. And we don't need to follow that, but we do need to consider it, because if you need to educate your funder or potential funder on why your impact might not match up with their expectations, you need to have that as part of your story as well. When you do this, you'll be able to look at your impact story more holistically. So this isn't just about, we need to define how many jobs we are getting because that's our mission. We want to really understand what's going on around it, what other factors are in there, what are those expectations, because you want to really understand some of the nuances that are happening here so you can take control of what your organization can take control of. The next step is to create and measure those impacts. So next, we learn from your constituents to understand how they view your organization's impact. We objectively hear from clients, members, or constituents, even partners, people who see what you're doing from the outside, and really can articulate your work from their perspective. We then align that language with your organization's mission and short and long-term outcomes. So this is really where you can start to play into if there's something, lifting people out of poverty, changing policy, things that can take years. What's that long-term outcome? But then what do people talk about? What changes do people see that might be smaller outcomes that lead towards that bigger one? We then measure these constituent-centered impacts, and by making them constituent or the people that you serve in more plain language, by making them articulated that way, you're going to get higher results. Rather than coming up with your own impacts and surveying people, um, by putting them in their own language, you know that those are impacts you are making, and your constituents see that as well. So when you do this, you'll be able to show the value that you bring to your community, because a donor is not there to support your organization. It's there to support the people that you serve. And so the more you can connect them with your community, with the changes that the people you serve see, the more connected that donor is going to be, because they're off in their donor funder world. This can really help connect them more closely with your work. And the last is to put together that story, build a layered story, because funders, especially major funders, don't just need heartstrings pulled. They need that connection I was just talking about to those you serve. How do the people you serve think and feel about your services? Because that's really important. If you serve people who aren't super into what you're doing, that might not help you make the biggest impact. But I know you can see when people are really appreciate your services, when you're making their lives better. And so that's what you want to connect people with. You also want to understand the complexity of the situation, why change is difficult, and what factors you're facing head on, because donors don't fully understand the challenge that you are tackling. So if they have different expectations, you want to be able to share with them, this is where that context comes in, why now, that number one element of story really helps them understand, one, that you know a lot about this topic, but two, that they might need to learn more to really understand what needs to happen here. And then lastly, the numbers. Funders are numbers people, whether we like it or not. And so how widespread your impact is and how you're making sure your work is building towards your mission, that's really what they want to know. I think we can talk about storytelling in a lot of different ways, but when you can show them the impact you're making and how prevalent it is, that's the data that they need, as well as that connection to people, to know that you're an organization worthy of investing in. So that kind of comes back to this 5-step building a layered story. We think about why your organization, bringing in the actions that you're taking, telling the stories that the people you serve are saying, being able to show some of the data behind those stories and how they can help. That's really, in the simplest form, that's what it takes to tell an impact story. And when you do this, you'll be able to confidently share your story with large funders. And when you're confident in your impact, you don't have to fit perfectly into their mold of what they're asking for. People don't necessarily need to know, be specifically concerned about the challenge you're facing. You can go in with confidence that you know how you're making an impact, and that really sets you ahead. So, oh my gosh, I need more water. If you guys have any questions, I haven't been reading the chat specifically, but yeah, I see considering word of mouth is your best advertising. You certainly, by all means, you need testimonials in this storytelling. But when I hear the word advertising, I think small donors, monthly donors, things that are going out into your email list. This is specifically for private funders, major gifts, foundations, people who need to really level or who need to better understand your impact in order to give. They're experienced philanthropists. Yeah, I think, okay, I'm going to go through these once I wrap up. I think you guys have some great questions here. So, as we wrap up, does struggling to define your organization's impact represent potentially a bigger problem here? Um, because showing your impact is hard, especially in a complex society. I mean, I have no idea what the next 4 years are going to bring to the United States. But it can be, and I know we have international folks on the call too, so I'm sure there's similar challenges. When you're in a complex society, it can be really hard to know exactly what your organization is doing. So you might need a new method for determining your impact, um, because there's outside factors that affect your mission, like politics, like news, social media. There also might be racist or biased systems that you fight against that others might not see. And so that just adds another layer of complexity of how you have to explain your work to donors. And there might be misinformation out there. People don't always come in with the level of knowledge that you have about your work. And so you do have to address some of those things going on. And so you have all these, just kind of a web of mess that you have to really push your impact through in order to get to these funders. And so one of the changes I want you to be thinking about is, your organization has expert knowledge. You know how to run your programs, you know all the research behind why you're choosing to address your mission with those programs. You might be good at big data gathering, whether it's in your CRMs, whether it's, general data about demographics and things that are happening in your community. Um, I think all these things are great. You know best practices in your sector. Perhaps there's ways people have done things similarly that you can learn from. You share information back and forth with other organizations. You're also able to learn from the past and what you've done before that's worked, and you know all the terms and methodology within your sector, within the challenge that you're solving. And so that is expert knowledge, and that is all so necessary for the work that you do. But I want you to be thinking also about your community's knowledge. Um, and this is where I think the impact, being able to see the impact through their eyes, can really make a difference. So your community knowledge is the real change they see and feel within the work that you do. They also can see what supports or gets in the way of your mission. Perhaps you are doing some of these programs, but they're not having the impact you would like. There might be some things that are happening within your community that they, you know, can't get a bus to your programs. They maybe fear certain, that they might be you know, affected in negative ways if they go to, certain are around certain groups of people, like police or, government figures. So being able to have that community knowledge of what is getting in the way, or what is helping your impact, is really important. And just knowing the human side of what is happening. I think in nonprofits, sometimes we get so caught up in our expertise and gathering big data that we forget, you know, it's not just about getting a job, it's really about having a better life. And so, how do we make sure we're framing things in a way that is important to the people that we serve? So, you and your team most likely feel confident in supporting your community through day-to-day tasks at a high level, knowing the inputs and outputs of your work. So that's what you're doing, and how many people are attending, that type of data. And you're also thinking through the ideal outcomes and changes you want to make in your community, but you might not know exactly what that is. So if you don't take the time to listen outside of your work, you won't understand the real outcomes and impacts you're making. You can't see the opportunities to increase that impact, to remove some of the barriers that the people you serve are facing, and you aren't able to connect potential funders directly to your constituents. again, the funders are there to support the people you serve. And so how do you know, make that thread as small as possible so they don't have to guess? So if you have a takeaway, it's really these three things: to listen to your community to see your impact from their perspective, to think about ways to measure smaller steps to your big audacious goals, your larger impacts, and to tell a multifaceted story. So you're not just storytelling in one way, you have the real human stories, you have those testimonials, you have the data, you can show the work, um, to really connect with funders, um, who are complex people themselves. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and take a look at some of the questions that we have. And you guys have like some big, deep questions. So I wanted to make sure we can address some of those.
Emily,
What are you
thank
seeing out
you.
there?
Thank you so much for all of that. And yes, please do. We don't see any questions in the Q&A, which is fine, but there are a number funneling into the chat. Can we give people another minute to go ahead and pose those questions before we answer them? And I just have a quick public service announcement
Yeah.
for folks. If you're not already on the list for this series, it'll be more important than ever to be on it in the future. And so if you're not familiar with that, we'll make sure that you see the link at the end of the presentation today. You'll see some slides that'll allow you to follow this. All this content from the series is over and available for you at DonorSearch.net under the resources tab, but you can, on the DonorSearch site, make sure that you're on the email list for future communications. And by the way, we were asked about recordings, and a recording of this, along with a link to the slides, will be coming to you in the next 48 hours. So you can be on the lookout for that. If you don't receive it, that just means that it's gone to your spam filter. So do take a look in there. And if you ever have difficulty in getting that content, you can always reach out to me. My email address at DonorSearch is Jay, that's my name, Jay, at DonorSearch.net. One last thing, which is that we are, again, this is our last live session today, this year. And so we're really grateful that you took time for this and that Emily is here to share. But we have a lot coming up in the new year. So in addition to the podcast episodes, which will complete with all 5 of this year's top 5 CNN heroes, you can listen to those in your favorite podcasting network or by subscribing on the YouTube channel for DonorSearch. Please take a look at all that. In addition to that, we have a bit of an evolution in this series that's occurring starting in January. So I'm going to just give you a teaser on that, and then we'll go back to the questions. So go ahead and list those questions now. First of all, every Tuesday and Thursday, we will have a live program. The webinars that you're familiar with for See a Free Credit, like today's, will be a regular feature of our programming starting every single Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern. That will now be called How to Raise. So there's no question about what's going to happen. It'll be there for you every single Thursday for 48 of the weeks next year at 1 p.m. Eastern time. And once again, subscribe so you know what those sessions are and when they are, but you can go ahead and gather your credits and training that way. We also have an evolution in our webcasts. So that will be now the Frontlines for Social Good. That program will be every single Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern, and it will contain conversations on hot topics, news items, and nonprofit success stories. If you have a story that you think needs to be covered there, let us know. You'll see a survey at the end of the presentation today. That's one way for you to let us know today what you think about what we're doing, but maybe more importantly, what you'd like to see us do in the future. So please fill that out. That's our way of making sure that we do what you need done for you. And then finally, the podcast will be changed to simply PM, which will be covering, again, those conversations that are so rare in this sector with the thought leaders that we all look to. That'll be available for you every single weekend. So with that, Emily, please jump right into the questions.
Excellent. Yeah. So I'm going to start with the ones in the question and answer. So if you have one from the chat and want to put it on there, that'll just help me read through them a little better. But I have one from Beth about what questions should you ask your constituents to be able to craft an impact case study? So in that case, the questions are going to be unique to your organization, but things that I would want to know, and this might be, I know someone had a question about methods for doing this work, and there's some nuances in doing interviews and focus groups and having conversations with people, And surveys are really for gathering that data that you want to share. So I usually start with those conversations. And I want to ask people, you know, what does, let's say you have the word confidence or empowerment in your mission. What do those words mean to your constituents? Because they might be very different from what you're experiencing. So, you know, I know for the My Block, My Hood, My City work I did, finding out what community meant for people, especially like what did they see on a day-to-day basis that told them their community was strong. Starting to get to those actions, those things that they could see, started to bring forward what would impact their lives the most. And then you also want to ask them about what change did they experience with your organization? And that's kind of too big of a question, but as you have those conversations, you want to get more nuance. So how did you feel, before you received our services? How is your life different now in these specific ways? So the more specific you can get, the better you're going to be able to get those responses to then know what you need to measure, what your true impacts are on those humans. Let's see, EJ has, what's the initial outreach look like after you've identified a donor prospect, given their admitted connection to your issue, your constituents, and that you're seeing similar areas to organization? EJ, I think my expertise is really around that storytelling. So I think it would depend on the funder that you're reaching out to. Sometimes you just have to lead with a proposal. Sometimes you don't get that conversation, and so you're able to tell that full story. If it's shorter, then you really need to figure out what elements you can pull from those 5 storytelling elements to get your concept across. So potentially context and impact might be the shortest way to get there. But it might just be a phone call or an email. And so you just have to really highlight what's your hook. And the way that I recommend organizations find their hook is try your story out on different people who might have a similar mindset to those funders that you're reaching, because oftentimes you can tell people, like now I can talk to you for an hour, but you're probably only going to remember a few things. And so being able to learn what are the hooks within your story that really resonate, and you can build those into a shorter story. Let's see, Carolyn, any suggestions for how to get personal stories for a mental health program? You definitely want to be sensitive around certain populations. But I think finding people who are willing to anonymously share is great, being able to start that conversation. I think also a good place to look at when you have sensitive information is to think about people who have already succeeded in your program, having them tell their stories because they might be in a less vulnerable place. They have experienced your full range of services, and they're a success story too. So those are really great areas to try to find people who might not be in the thick of their challenge, and so you don't have to, play with their vulnerability and really focus on people who maybe are at a different place in their life. Let's see. Busy says, I don't think this is a fit for Al Palmer. Trustees have not shown interest in large capital projects outside the Pikes Peak region. I'd love to know more, Bessie. I don't know exactly what that situation is. And, it could be capital projects, but it could also, be general funding. It doesn't necessarily have to be for a specific cause, but making sure, obviously, if you're in a specific region, you might need to find people that care within that region. So that can be tricky. Adria says, what about showcasing other funders? Many funders want to see who else is supporting you. Is it better to demonstrate that you have robust funding or highlight the need for additional support? I think when you tell your full story And this is where that number 5 element is super important, that what is the opportunity? Because it's nice to just, you need funding and to gather general funding, but you need to be able to call out exactly how this donor can help you. Even though it might, you obviously know it might not pan out, but to be able to, you can share the other funding, and maybe, there's some element of telling how you're currently funded. But you need to make sure there is some gap, whether it's growth, whether it's some sort of change in your environment that shows the need for that funding now. Oh, sorry, Bissy, I saw you added in. What tools would you use to listen to your constituents? So, yeah, interviews, virtual, in-person surveys, those are really the main ingredients. I think you can gather ideas from social media, asking questions there. If you're at an event, taking time to either talk to people or have a show of hands. There's a lot of different ways you can gather the information and listen to your constituents. I do think interviews or conversations, coffees, those are really a great place to get some of these nuances that we're talking about. What are people thinking and feeling? And you can't get that from a survey. You can't necessarily get that from social media. You really need to do some more in-depth conversations, but you don't need to talk to everybody. That's really key here. Just need to talk to enough people to start to see the patterns in the impact that you're making. Let's see. Joan, we are an art museum. How do we share or show impact? For instance, our educational programs work with public school students, so we don't receive information about the long-term impacts. And Joan, I think this would be, figuring out your how this connects back to your mission. Because being able to focus on what you can control is super important in this situation. So I'm just trying to think out loud right now. For instance, I was working with an organization that supported teachers but their mission was really around the students of those teachers who are educating adults and literacy. And so there's a gap there. They weren't talking to the students, they were talking to the teachers. And so we had to really shift around their impacts to what did the teachers see of changes that we're making? How did the teachers feel confident in helping them progress their students forward? And so being able to frame things in what you can control and who you can talk to. So maybe in your situation, focusing on teachers, collecting some feedback and data from teachers so they can give you some of that feedback. There might be some creative ways, being an art museum, I think of like, how could you interact with the students and gather some of the ways that you're helping them think differently that would lead up to your mission while they're at your museum, and being able to showcase it in a way that really fits the work that you're doing, creative and thinking through art. All right, we are just at a minute to the hour. I think we'll sort of wrap it up there, but I really appreciate everyone's questions. As Jay mentioned, he'll send out some information on this presentation, the slides, everything. I'll also send you guys a free white paper I did on telling your story through qualitative research, which will get into some of those details that we were talking about with these questions.
Thank you so much for all this. Again, Emily, really great content and great answers to lots of terrific questions. Before you go, would you mind sharing how people can reach out to you or follow your work?
Excellent. Yes, I am on LinkedIn. So you can find me, Emily Taylor, on LinkedIn through Teeny Big or at teenybig.com.
Terrific. Thank you so much. And hopefully we can manage to get that in the chat as we close down here today. So do take a look for the links in the chat to that and other items. I'm sure you'll appreciate it. Be on the lookout for that email, which will include a link to this recording, which you can also share with colleagues, because I'm sure this discussion about impact stories will involve more than an audience of one. You'll want to be able to share that with colleagues. And then also the link to the slides. You'll see all that coming to you very soon. So do be on the lookout for that. And please do fill out the survey at the conclusion here today. It's one of our only ways of finding out what you need to see and hear as we enter our 10th year. So thank you so much for being here for both today and for the year as a whole. Our appreciation to Emily very much for sharing a very important topic at the end of the year. And we'll look forward to seeing you all in 2025. So then, until then, take care.